Welcome to another deep dive. I am, I'm incredibly excited about our mission today because we are going to completely shift how you view the place where you work.
Oh, absolutely. It's a total perspective shift.
Right. Because whether you are, prepping for a management meeting tomorrow morning or you're just insanely curious about why your office operates the way it actually does, this deep dive is going to give you some massive aha moments.
Yeah, about the invisible rules governing your 9 to 5.
Exactly. So today we are pulling from Catherine Miller's comprehensive textbook, Organizational Communication, Approaches and Processes. And our core mission here, we're going to explore how communication doesn't just happen inside an organization.
It actually creates the organization.
Yes, we're going to look at the hidden strings of power, how the very specific language you use shapes your actions, and how workplaces are, according to the research we'll look at, fundamentally built on gendered foundations.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, for decades, the standard way to think about a company or an institution was to view it as a container.
Like a physical box.
Right, exactly. You can picture it like a giant physical machine or maybe a family unit. And in that container model, communication was just something that happened inside the walls.
Just transmitting info from point A to point B.
Exactly. The container existed first, and the talking happened second. But today, we are breaking that container entirely. We're exploring what scholars call the constitutive approaches.
Which means?
It's the understanding that our daily conversations, our quick emails, our casual Slack messages, they literally build the reality of our workplaces from the ground up. The talk is the organization.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about the Communicative Constitution of Organization, or CCO for short. Now, I know you listening probably already understand that culture is shaped by communication. But this goes deeper.
Much deeper.
The text uses this great analogy to ground it, the grocery store.
Oh, I love this one.
Right. So when you walk into a grocery store, there are pre-existing rules. You have to pay for your food, and you're supposed to use the express lane only if you have, say, 15 items or fewer.
That is the structure.
Right. But you also have agency. You can act differently. You might chat up the clerk, make a quick human connection, and suddenly they wave you into the express lane, even though you're clearly holding 20 items.
You just used your agency to bend the structure.
Exactly. Academics call this the duality of structure. Structure guides behavior, but behavior creates and alters structure. But let's move past the basics. How does this actually scale up in a modern corporate environment?
That scaling up is exactly what a group of researchers known as the Montreal School focuses on. They look very closely at the micro level of this process, breaking it down into two things: conversation and text.
So conversation being the actual talking.
Right. Conversation is the ongoing, fluid interaction among people. Text is the meaning or the substance that gets captured and frozen from that conversation. The Montreal School argues there's this continuous scaling up process where local, everyday conversations eventually become codified texts. And by texts, I mean things like a company mission statement, a standardized operating procedure, or even just a deeply ingrained cultural norm.
There's a brilliant study in the material by Matthew Koshman that makes this so real. He studied an interorganizational group called City Partners.
A community collaboration group, right?
Yeah, and they were really struggling to define what their collective identity actually was. During one incredibly mundane planning meeting, the director just casually threw out a comment. He said something like, maybe we could think of our work as sort of like keeping an eye on the dashboard of a car.
Just a throwaway metaphor.
A total throwaway. But then other people in the meeting started repeating it.
And that is the scaling up process in real time. Over the next few weeks, they started talking about the dashboard thing. Then they started talking about moving the needle, checking if the tank was full.
It totally took over.
It did. That casual metaphor distanced itself from the original speaker. It became an authoritative text of its own. The dashboard concept completely shaped the group's collective identity and guided their future strategic actions.
It's pretty wild when you realize how much of your rigid corporate strategy probably started as an offhand comment in a break room that just happened to stick.
Absolutely. Now, if the Montreal School is looking at those micro-conversations, the material also brings in Robert McPhee's four flows theory, which looks at how large-scale organizing actually happens.
Right. McPhee argues there are four distinct flows of communication that must exist for an organization to be, well, an organization. Flow number one is membership negotiation.
Which is the communication that determines who is in and who is out.
Like a brutal multi-round tech interview process. It's not just about coding skills. It's a communicative hazing ritual to see if you fit the culture.
Precisely. Or a college rush week. It's the language of inclusion and exclusion. Flow number 2 is self-structuring.
So these are the charters, the employee manuals, the official org charts that steer the ship.
Right, they define how things are officially supposed to work. Then we have the third flow, activity coordination.
Which, in the era of remote work, is basically our entire lives. Activity coordination is the communication required to actually get the work done together on a daily basis.
The endless pinging on Slack, the Microsoft Teams huddles.
The quick emails clarifying a deadline.
Yes.
And finally, the fourth flow is institutional positioning. This is how the organization interacts with the outside world. How does it justify its existence to the public?
A great historical example the text notes is the Livestrong Foundation.
Right, when they faced massive controversy surrounding Lance Armstrong, they used institutional positioning to rapidly change their messaging.
They shifted the focus away from their disgraced founder and redirected their public communication toward the millions of everyday people facing cancer.
And what's fascinating is that these four flows apply to absolutely everything. The textbook even highlights the Vatican as a case study. Yeah, you would think a centuries-old institution like the Catholic Church is just a permanent, unmoving stone monolith.
But it relies heavily on these exact 4 ongoing communication flows to maintain its structure, manage its members, and navigate global crises.
It proves that an organization is an ongoing verb organizing, not a static noun. It has to be constantly talked into existence every single day, or it disappears.
Which perfectly brings us to the next vital layer. If organizations are created entirely by talk, then we need to look at the immense hidden power within that talk.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The material introduces a critical difference between little-a-day discourse and big D discourse.
Nah.
And yes, for you listening, that is lowercase d versus uppercase d.
It sounds like a grammar lesson, but it's actually about mind control.
Basically, yeah.
It's a foundational distinction. Little day discourse refers to the everyday talk. The text messages, the casual social practices, the specific words you choose in a meeting.
Okay, and big D discourse.
That refers to general, enduring systems of thought. Think of the overarching concept of compassion in the healthcare field, or the deep-seated belief in hustle culture at a Silicon Valley startup.
And why this matters to you is that these big D discourses completely shaped our ideology. They shape our taken-for-granted assumptions about reality.
They silently dictate what we believe exists, what we believe is inherently good, and what we believe is absolutely impossible to change.
To make this concrete, let's look at a 1996 study by Robin Clare mentioned in the text. It's about the phrase, real job.
Oh, this is a great example.
Think about when an older relative asks a college student who is waiting tables, so when are you getting a real job? The question itself is little did discourse. It's just a casual, everyday string of words.
But what it does is actively reinforce a massive big D discourse.
Exactly. It reinforces the societal belief that waiting tables or working retail somehow isn't valuable, legitimate, or worthy of respect. That tiny phrase subtly shapes power dynamics and societal worth based purely on language.
There is another deeply institutional example involving OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. A researcher named Zoller analyzed how OSHA deliberately shifted its terminology.
What did they change?
For years, they used the term repetitive strain injuries, but then they officially changed it to a new term, upper extremity musculoskeletal disorder.
Wait, I want to push back on that for a second. Isn't that just medical terminology evolving? Science gets more precise over time. Are the critical theorists in the text suggesting OSHA did that maliciously, or is it just a byproduct of bureaucratic medical jargon?
What's fascinating here is that critical theorists would argue it doesn't even need to be a smoky room malicious conspiracy to be an exercise of power.
How so?
Look at the linguistic shift. By removing the words strain and injuries, the new term subtly shifts the blame. An injury implies something external happened to you, like a workplace condition hurt you.
Oh, I see. And a disorder.
A disorder implies a pre-existing bodily failure on the part of the worker. Even if it was done just for medical precision, that tiny change in little discourse fundamentally protects management's power.
It limits their liability and reinforces a big D discourse of corporate protection over worker vulnerability. That makes you rethink every single corporate policy update you've ever skimmed over.
Totally.
The researcher Dennis Mumby has a metaphor in the text that I absolutely love. He compares organizational language to a spider web. When you or I look at a spider web in the garden, we just see a beautiful, natural product of nature. We don't think about it.
Right, but that web is actively constructed as a site of struggle and power between the spider and its prey.
Our workplace language is exactly that web. It looks entirely natural, but it is meticulously built to hold power.
And that leads us directly into how this language creates invisible strings of control over us. We are shifting now into what the text categorizes as radical frames of reference.
Which is just a way of saying we're viewing this through the lens of critical theory. And just to be clear, we're just reporting on how critical theorists view this. They take a very specific, uncompromising stance here. They view organizations fundamentally as battlegrounds of power and domination.
Right. And central to this battleground is a concept by the theorist Antonio Gramsci called hegemony, which you might have heard referred to as manufactured consent.
Now, hegemony is not a boss in a suit screaming at you to work harder under threat of being fired. That's too obvious.
Hegemony is much more insidious. It occurs when a dominant group leads another group to willingly accept their own subordination as the natural norm.
You agree to the rules, and you even police yourself because you've been entirely convinced those rules are just the way the world works.
But the immediate question is, how does hegemony function in today's modern offices? So many companies today pride themselves on flat, team-based structures.
Yeah, they got rid of the corner offices. Everyone is supposedly an equal collaborator.
There are no traditional bosses to manufacture that consent.
Which brings us to the theory of concerted control, developed by Barker, Cheney, and Tompkins. They looked at these flat structures and found something terrifying.
In self-managing teams, control doesn't disappear at all. It just shifts.
It moves from the management directly to the workers themselves through two mechanisms, identification and discipline. First, the workers identify with the company's core values. They internalize the mission.
Then, the team begins to discipline each other to ensure everyone is living up to those values.
The researchers share the story of a worker named Danny. Danny's self-managing team was dealing with a few members consistently coming in late.
In an old-school traditional office, a manager would eventually step in, write them up, and maybe fire them.
But here, the team got together, the peers, and they created a new guideline. If you are late 3 times, you are fired, and they enforced it.
And think about how this applies today. Think about the pressure to have your green active dot on in Slack or Microsoft Teams at all times.
Yes. It's usually not your boss monitoring your green dot, it's your peers. It's the subtle, passive-aggressive message from a coworker asking, hey, were you offline this afternoon?
We think of team-based, peer-enforced environments as empowering and democratic. But the researchers point out the dark irony here.
Peer-enforced discipline is almost always far more powerful, far more strict, and much more difficult to resist than traditional bureaucratic rules.
Exactly. If your boss yells at you, you can go to the break room and complain to your coworkers. You can build solidarity against the hierarchy.
But if your coworkers are the ones enforcing the rules, there is nowhere to hide. You're being policed by the people you eat lunch with.
The control is concertive. It is everywhere, all at once.
It's peer pressure weaponized for corporate efficiency. And honestly, it's exhausting to think about. Which brings us to another massive, often completely invisible structure of control covered deeply in the text, the gendered organization.
Exploring this through the textbook's feminist approaches offers another profound shift in how we see the container.
And again, we're just observing the factual reporting on feminist scholarship here. The scholar Karen Ashcraft makes a vital point in the material.
She argues that feminist organizational communication isn't just some tiny, isolated subset of critical theory. It is deeply, inextricably tied to the larger feminist movement.
Right. A core foundational belief in this scholarship is that traditional bureaucratic organizations are not neutral playgrounds. They are inherently, fundamentally patriarchal by their very design.
Let's break down what that actually means in practice. The argument is that the traditional bureaucratic workplace values and rewards stereotypical male characteristics, things like strict logic, aggressiveness, hyper-competitiveness, and individualism.
Meanwhile, it actively downplays, dismisses, or penalizes female characteristics like emotion, empathy, connectedness, and collaborative care.
And this abstract patriarchy shapes the literal, physical, and structural reality of the workplace, especially for women and minorities.
It creates highly visible phenomena like the mommy track, where women are quietly sidelined from promotions simply because they might want families.
While men who have families are often viewed as more stable and get promoted.
Exactly. It creates tokenism, where a person becomes the sole representative of their entire demographic group and carries that immense, unfair pressure.
Or the intense structural barriers women face when trying to opt in or on-ramp back into a career after taking time for childcare, often finding the doors permanently closed.
So if we go back to the idea that communication builds the organization, how exactly does our talk sustain these patriarchal structures? How do we literally talk these unfair structures into remaining in place?
There's a study in the text by Robin Clare from 1993 that really gets into this. It looked at how sexual harassment is actually framed in office dialogue and the coping mechanisms victims use.
Right, and she found that when women experience harassment, they often use specific framing devices to cope with the trauma and the awkwardness.
They might publicly call it a simple misunderstanding or brush it off to HR as just a harmless joke.
Now, on an individual level, that might be a necessary personal survival mechanism to protect their career in a hostile environment. But the critical theory argues that, communicatively, this language actually normalizes the behavior.
It sweeps the systemic issue under the rug and actively supports the patriarchal underpinnings of the workplace.
It's a tragic form of that hegemony we talked about earlier, accepting the dominant abusive norm to survive.
There is another study that really twists your brain, done by Paige Edley in 2000. It looks at women-led businesses.
Now, you might naturally assume that a business owned and operated entirely by women would automatically dismantle these patriarchal norms, right? If you remove the men, you remove the patriarchy.
But Edley studied an all-female interior design firm that publicly aimed for flexibility, family support, and an alternative culture.
And what she found was cognitive dissonance. In reality, the owner routinely restricted the best assignments for employees who were taking family time.
Even more telling was how the employees communicated with each other. When they had entirely valid professional conflicts over strategy or design, they would frequently dismiss their own arguments by blaming it on PMS or saying someone was just being moody.
That is wild. They were playing directly into the most toxic patriarchal sexual stereotypes to avoid dealing with standard professional conflict.
It shows just how deeply embedded Big D discourses really are. You can't just change the gender of the boss and expect the container to magically change.
Because the communication inside the container is still building the exact same oppressive structure.
The text also highlights Angela Treathoi's fascinating research on what she calls disciplined bodies. Professional women face this impossible, contradictory conundrum every day.
They are expected to display a physical body that is strong and professional, but not threatening to men.
The women interviewed in her study talked about the anxiety of having a firm handshake, but not overdoing it. They talked about the intense, exhausting pressure to constantly police their physical bodies so they don't, as the text puts it, leak out in a public sphere that values strict male control.
That means actively suppressing any display of emotion, hiding a pregnancy for as long as humanly possible, or masking exhaustion. It's a constant performance.
And of course, we also have to look at how men communicate their roles within these structures. This raises an important question. What happens when you ask the people benefiting from the structure to analyze it?
Right. A 2010 study by Tracy and Rivera focused specifically on male executives.
When the researchers asked these executives about gender equity in the abstract, the executives fully supported it. They hit all the right talking points. They said all the right things about balance, fairness, and modern values.
But then the conversation shifted to their own homes.
Exactly. When asked about their own lives, they fell right back onto aversive sexism. They fully expected their wives to handle the heavy lifting of the work-life balance, the childcare, the mental load.
When talking about the future, they imagined specific, ambitious career paths for their sons becoming doctors or CEOs.
But when talking about their daughters, they mostly just imagine their family life.
But here is the glimmer of hope the textbook points out. They call them flickers of transformation in that exact study. When those male executives were talking about their own homes and slipping into those older stereotypes, the audio recording showed something fascinating.
The executives used a massive amount of verbal fillers, lots of ums, ahs, stutters, and long pauses.
And why that matters communicatively is that hesitation shows friction. It shows that their internal viewpoints are in a state of flux.
They know the old Big D discourse of traditional gender roles is colliding with the new Big D discourse of equality. They are stumbling because they are starting to question the old norms, even if they haven't fully broken out of them yet.
And that brings us full circle to the immense power of the constitutive approach. If organizations and massive social norms are created by communication, even hesitant communication filled with ums and ahs, then they can be changed by communication.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's bring this all together.
At the start of this deep dive, we probably view the office as just a simple physical container, a place you commute to, do your tasks, and leave.
But now, hopefully, you see that your workplace is constantly being built, moment by your texts, your casual conversations, your little discourses.
It is held together not by concrete and steel, but by invisible strings of concerted control, peer pressure on Slack, and deeply ingrained historical lines of gender and power.
Knowledge is most valuable when it is deeply understood and practically applied. The next time you are sitting in a team meeting or reading a seemingly boring company memo about a policy update, pay close attention to the little paid discourse.
Notice the specific words being used. Ask yourself who is actually setting the rules and who benefits from them.
And watch closely how peer pressure might be acting as a tool of concerted control over you and your colleagues. Once you can finally see the spider web, you can navigate it much more effectively.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, drawn from Francois Courin's concept of ventriloquism, which is briefly mentioned in the text.
This is great thought exercise.
Think about the mission statements, the employee rule books, and the endless corporate emails at your job. We usually think we're using those texts as tools to get things done, like a ventriloquist using a wooden dummy.
Right.
But based on everything we've learned today, ask yourself, do those texts actually have a life of their own? Are the rules and the corporate language actually making you act? Are they turning you into the dummy?
It is definitely something to think about the next time you blindly hit send on a corporate email with a bunch of jargon.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the container, and we'll catch you next time.